Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather, and welcome to possibly my biggest book haul ever. To add extra drama to this situation, I will be trying to film this video before a thunderstorm hits. We'll see if I am able to do that. This book haul is a combination of three separate things. First of all, I placed an order in June for some books that did not arrive until the beginning of July. Secondly, towards the end of June, I also began having bookish adventures with Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, which was such fun, so we went on an indie book crawl at the end of June. And then 2 weeks later was my library book sale, which is possibly the biggest library book sale in the area. So I have accumulated a lot of books this summer. I will be holding off on buying any more until the beginning of September when the next library book sale is. I've missed them. We haven't had them in a year. What can I say? So allow me to start by showing you some of my purchases. First of all, I ordered for myself Uncle Vanya by Anton Chekhov. This particular edition was adapted by Conor McPherson, and this was the version that recently played in London in the early winter of 2020. I was lucky enough to watch the broadcast on PBS this past May of a filmed version, and I fell in love. I didn't think I loved Chekhov until I saw this version, so I had to get this adaptation, which as far as I can tell is very faithful to the original, so I'm quite pleased with that. If you're not familiar with Uncle Vanya, it is about a crumbling estate in the Russian countryside in which Vanya's brother-in-law, the professor, returns with his new wife and completely upends the family's way of life with growing consequences for everyone in their circle. Next in my order was A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, which is an Indian classic, and I know it's a family saga that possibly covers generations about a family's search for a suitable boy to marry their daughter. Okay, it's not multiple generations, but it is the story of 4 different families in India in the 1950s, set against the backdrop of this suit for a suitable marriage partner. It sounds fantastic, but I don't know what I've gotten myself into. I did not expect it to be this long. It is longer than my edition of War and Peace. I've checked. So I probably won't be tackling this for a while, but when I'm feeling brave, I would love to do it. Next, I bought The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I loved Laura Purcell's book The Poison Thread or The Corset, depending on where you are, it went by a different title. So I would love to read some of her other Gothic novels. That's honestly all I know about this book. I know nothing about the plot of this current book. I've heard middling reviews of it, so I'm intrigued to see what I eventually think of it. Next, I purchased Beheld by Tara Shea Nesbitt. This looks at women's lives in a Puritan community in Massachusetts, I believe, in the early 1600s. Yes, it's about 2 women in 2 different social circumstances in this community, and it looks at women's lives in general. There is a murder that happens, and it also looks at the question of history and whose story is told and whose story is not believed. It sounds fantastic, and I'm always intrigued by stories about the Puritan community living in the northeast of the United States, as I do. Next, and the reason for my purchase in the first place, was because The Lost Shtetl by Max Gross was on sale. This was a book that I won as a new release from BookCon Online last year. However, a year later, I still have not received my copy, so I thought this discounted copy was as close as I was going to get. This sounds like a bit of magical realism, honestly. This is the story of a tiny Jewish community, or shtetl, in the Polish forest. So deep in the Polish forest that people have forgotten it's there. So they have luckily been spared the Holocaust, the Cold War, everything. They have been stuck in the early 1900s until now. So it is the story of them coming into contact with modern society again and how they deal with all of that, as well as the mystery of what has happened to a young couple who has now disappeared from the settlement. And so a contemporary detective gets involved, people in the community are trying to figure out what has happened to this young couple. To me, that sounds fascinating, even without the missing couple, so I'm very intrigued to see where this goes. And finally, perhaps a little contradictory given that last book, I picked up Cajun Skies by Christine Lunens, which is the book that inspired the film Jojo Rabbit. And I want to see the film because it looks really, really good and very smart and very funny. And I enjoy that in a Holocaust film. So I subscribe to the Mel Brooks theory that the more you are able to laugh at something, the less power it has over you. Which is why he takes every opportunity he can to make fun of Hitler in every single one of his films. And I think that's a great theory. So I really want to see Jojo Rabbit, but when I saw this was on sale, I thought, aha, I can read the book first. However, I've heard middling reviews about this book since I purchased it. So I don't know if what drew me to Jojo Rabbit was the fact that Taika Waititi's zany sense of humor filtered this story and made it far more palatable, or if the writing isn't good, I'm really not sure. But it is the story of a young boy in Germany in the late 1930s, 1940s, who is fully part of the Nazi Party. He's part of the Hitler Youth, until he discovers that his mother is hiding a young Jewish girl in their attic. And suddenly he has to confront, as a 10 or 11-year-old, everything that he's ever known and try and process all of that and make his own decisions. So I'm intrigued by that premise. I'm not sure how it's going to be delivered, but I will let you know. Then my book collection with Marissa started with her giving me a book, which is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which I have heard nothing but wonderful things about from my father and many other reviewers on BookTube. It is the story of a young woman who, I believe, in the Midnight Library is able to look back on her life and reflect on the choices that she made that have led her to her present life, and explore alternate realities that she could have had if she had made different decisions. It sounds really interesting, so I'm intrigued to get to this at some point. Then we come to our my purchases from our indie bookshop crawl, and I am quite pleased with the results. I first have 2 novels by Ivan Turganiev. I have Home of the Gentry and First Love. I know virtually nothing about Turganiev except that he is frequently mentioned in Uncle Vanya as this sort of romantic ideal. So I'm intrigued to read some of his novels to figure out what that actually means. In reading summaries of his works, I decided against Fathers and Sons. It just didn't sound as interesting as these two, but honestly right now I can't remember much of either of their plots, but I will let you know if and when I read them because they are relatively short as well. Next, I picked up The Small House at Allington by Anthony Trollope. This is one of his Barsetshire series, which I would like to start again. I have to get a copy of The Warden and start with it first, but I have heard wonderful things about this particular novel in the series, so I'm very excited to get to it eventually. Also, on the Russian literature front, I picked up The Queen of Spades and Other Stories by Alexander Pushkin. I read Eugene Onegin last spring and I loved it, so I am intrigued to read his other works, especially because The Queen of Spades has also been turned into an opera, which I have heard wonderful things about, though I haven't seen or listened to it myself. So now I can read the short story first and then explore it. Next, I picked up The Shadowy Horses by Susanna Kearsley. My friend Amanda very kindly sent me one of Susanna Kearsley's other books a few months ago, and they all look fantastic, so anytime I see another Susanna Kearsley, I automatically pick it up. This book takes place in Scotland, and it's about two archaeologists who are searching to uncover the remains of a lost Roman legion. However, there seems to be a ghost of a lone Roman soldier haunting the process. And yeah, that's all I know, but it sounds very interesting. Next, I picked up The Boes Stratagem by George Farquhar, which is an 18th century play. It's a comedy, I believe. And quite honestly, that's all I know of the plot. This was a National Theatre Live broadcast a few years ago, which I missed, but it looked fantastic, so now at least I can read it eventually and find out if I will indeed love it as much as I think I will. On a completely different note, I then picked up The White Tiger by Aravind Adiga, which is an Indian novel which has just been turned into a film on Netflix, which looks fantastic, but I want to read this first. And I believe it's a revenge story of a young man who works himself up out of poverty to become the chauffeur to this other very wealthy family. But as he works with the family more and more, he begins to discover that they're just terrible people, and yet they have all this wealth. And so he starts to formulate some sort of revenge plan against the family he works for. It sounds fantastic and suspenseful, and I can't wait for this. And lastly, a book. I know I have said that I'm excited for all of these, but I really am so excited for this one, was The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. I have heard nothing but wonderful things about this book, from Katie at Books and Things, from Marissa, from our family friend Kathy, so I cannot wait to read it. It takes place in Oxford in the 19th century, and it's about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary and how certain words, particularly those more frequently used by women, were left by the wayside in its creation. I love Oxford, I love the 19th century, I love the OED, and I love words in all their forms and the evolution of words. So this just sounds perfect. I have moved downstairs for the second part of this book haul because it's cooler, and honestly, I don't want to carry all these books up the stairs right now. So, next comes my haul from the library book sale. Firstly, I found The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan. I have heard wonderful things about Amy Tan's writing, but I haven't read any of her books. And I feel like if I'm going to start somewhere, The Joy Luck Club is the place that I should start before I explore further. Next, I picked up Rob Roy by Sir Walter Scott. I did not realize that the film was actually based on this novel, but it is about Rob Roy, the legendary outlaw of 18th century Scotland, to whom I am supposedly related. So it really behooves me to have read this book. Next, I bought Miss Pennyroo Lives for a Day by Winifred Watson. I watched the film in high school with Frances McDormand and Amy Adams, and I loved it, but I have never read the actual novel. Plus, it's a Persephone at an indie book sale. Yes, please, thank you. But this is the story of Miss Pettigrew, who is first and foremost a nanny, and she thinks she's been assigned a job to look after children, but in fact she ends up looking after a 20-something socialite. And both of them end up changing each other's lives for the better. And next I picked up The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. I have never read this, and since I am moving to my new position, one of my new colleagues teaches an entire unit on the house on Mango Street. So again, it really behooves me to read it before we start working together. Next, I found Life Isn't All Hahahihi by Meera Syal. Meera Syal is a British Indian actress, and I never knew that she also wrote, so I was so pleased to find this novel. This is about 3 childhood friends, Sheila, Sunita, and Tanya, who are expected to be traditional wives and mothers in their Indian community in London, until one of them makes a documentary about their lives and everything explodes. It sounds wonderful, and I can't wait to see what her writing is like. Next, in one of my last videos, I asked for recommendations of other Georgette Heyer novels that you all read and loved, and one of them was at the book sale, and that was Arabella. Honestly, I know nothing about the plot except that one of you recommended it, so I'm thrilled to read another sweet Regency romance, hopefully. I also found Home Fire by Camilla Shamsi, which is a modern-day retelling of Medea? I think it's Medea, but as told through a modern-day Muslim family in London, I believe. I'm not sure, but it takes on family ties, searching for who are you in a family, the draw to ultra-conservatism, and indeed ISIS. I have heard nothing but wonderful things, and it won many, many awards, so I'm very excited to eventually read this. I also found a copy of The Gwenethers by Sarah Domet, which has been on my TBR list for years. It is the story of 4 girls, all named Guinevere, who are all abandoned at the Sisters of Supreme Adoration Convent as orphans. And so they form their own family, even though they are very different. But then something happens to test that, and I'm not entirely sure what that is. It sounds like it could be magically real, but I'm not sure. I'm really just going to have to read it to figure that much out, so I will get back to you on that. I also picked up Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I'm sure I don't have to tell you what this is about because it is absolutely everywhere. Everyone has loved it, including a lot of my students. So now that I've found a very cheap copy, I would love to read it too. Also in nonfiction, I picked up The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester, which, as it says below, is a tale of murder, insanity, and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. What more do I need to know? They also had a copy of A Place for Us by Fatima Farhim Mirza, which is the story of an Indian Muslim family as they prepare for their daughter's wedding, but also have to face the estrangement of their son, and again, sorting through that family drama. I have heard nothing but fabulous things, so I'm very excited for this. I also picked up The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I read Bellman and Black last September and I loved it. And in fact, I read The 13th Tale back when I was 15. My English teacher recommended it to me. And I remember reading it but not being entirely sure what had actually happened. So now that I know I love Diane Setterfield and I'm much older, I would like to try it again and see if I love it more this time around. I also found a copy of the Canterbury Tales, but it is a line-by-line translation published by Barron's and translated by Vincent F. Hopper. I never read the Canterbury Tales in school, but it is so foundational a piece and indeed has been haunting everything else that I read and watch recently, so I feel like the universe is giving me a sign to read this. And the last couple of books I found were The Splendor Falls by Susanna Kearsley. Again, I picked this up because it is Susanna Kearsley and I love the covers, and I feel like they're just going to be cozy and fabulous historical fiction novels. This is also a novel of historical discovery. This young woman finds a castle that has history both of King John and his wife, Queen Isabel, and other history linked to World War II, and a girl whose love for an enemy soldier went awry, it says. So I think that sounds fantastic. I'm intrigued to see where that goes. Marissa and I both got a copy of The Last Painting of Sarah Devos by Dominic Smith, which is the story of a Dutch painting, presumably of Sarah Devos, in the early 1600s, and then how it influences its various owners throughout the 20th century. That sounds fantastic. I also picked up Mugby Junction by Charles Dickens, among others. This is a group of short stories that Dickens coordinated around the fictional railway junction of Mugby Junction. And each author that he called in wrote a short story that takes place on a branch which meets in Mugby Junction. I know Katie of Books and Things read this for Victober last year and really enjoyed it, so I'm intrigued to read it myself. I also picked up Reading Lolita in Tehran by Azar Nafisi. I have read other works recently that have quoted this book, and I've been wanting to read it for a while as a teacher myself, so I would love to read it. If you're unfamiliar, this is the story of a woman who leads a book club for young women in which they read classic literature which otherwise would not have been allowed under the rules of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I also picked up this gorgeous edition of The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. I have heard nothing but fabulous things about this as well, but haven't picked it up myself yet, so I finally grabbed that opportunity. And finally, I picked up this copy of Jane and the Waterloo Map by Stephanie Barron. This is part of her Jane Austen mystery series, which is fantastic if you haven't read it. This is the most current book, which I think is number 13 in the series. But the reason I picked it up, I already own a copy, but I picked it up because it's signed. I couldn't pass that up, so I will be adding this to my collection of Stephanie Barron mysteries. And lastly, I picked up a couple of DVDs, which are also literary in theme, so I thought I'd tell you about them as well. The first is The Last Station, which is an adaptation of a novel by Jay Perini, which is also fantastic. And it's about the last moments, the last days in Tolstoy's life. And about James McAvoy, who plays a young Tolstoyan who goes to Tolstoy's estate to be one of his disciples. He espoused a whole way of life towards the end of his life, so there were many of these disciples living on the estate in little cabins. However, when he arrives, he discovers that it's not as idealistic as he thought it was going to be, and that Tolstoy's decisions are in fact very problematic for his family. He is conflicted himself, as he is supposed to be celibate, but there is a very attractive other Tolstoyan woman on the estate as well. It was a fantastic film from every possible angle, so I'm so pleased to have it. I also picked up Quills, which stars Geoffrey Rush as the Marquis de Sade, who is imprisoned in a lunatic asylum, but is still trying to write and trying to smuggle his erotic fiction out through Kate Winslet, the laundry maid. So there's that plot going on. There's also the plot that he might be a bit drawn to her, but also Joaquin Phoenix, the visiting priest, trying to save the Marquis de Sade, is also a bit attracted to her. And the Marquis sees this and is trying to fuel that fire. So there are the questions of temptation, of censorship, as the asylum governor tries to stop the Marquis de Sade from writing, of sexuality. There are so many fabulous questions in this film, and those are what fascinate me more than the erotic content, which actually isn't very sexy at all. And then finally, let's see if I can do this, I picked up the entirety of Monty Python's Flying Circus. I've been a fan of Monty Python for ages, so I'm very pleased to have a full collection of all of their sketch comedy. So there you have it. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I hope you got up and got a drink or a snack or a whole meal perhaps. Do leave me a comment with which of these books you think I should start with, as I'm kind of overwhelmed by the amount of choices I have. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.